ahead and get started with our evening. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. We appreciate you coming. For those of you that are new, we hope you enjoy this evening. And for those of you that are coming back, I hope you continue to build those executive functions with us this evening. All right, so tonight, our presentation is a closer look at executive function skills in the action bucket. We're going to talk about the critical brain skills we need to nourish, flourish, and thrive. And I'm Kelly Spino. I am the Chief Organizational Learning Officer for the Children's Guild Alliance. And with me this evening is Angelique McCoy.
Good evening. This is Angelique McCoy, the Talent Development Coordinator at the Children's Guild Alliance. Welcome. So before we get started this evening, we always like to share just a few pieces of housekeeping to move us forward in our virtual training. First and foremost, I want to remind anyone who is looking for CEUs this evening that you would please put your name into the chat box, and then we'll take it from there with notifications and evaluations. If you have already done so, thank you. If you were just remembering, oh wait, I need some CEUs, just go ahead and plug your name right in the chat box and we'll grab it at the end of the workshop. So just to let you know, this workshop is being recorded. We're building a database of information for all of our friends and our constituents. And so we just let you know that if you'd like to be on camera, that's pretty awesome. And we're really glad about it. If you choose not to, it's still just as awesome. And we'd love for you to engage in any way that you feel comfortable. We will definitely be using the chat function and get some activities going and some engagement. So feel free to plug your thoughts in there and just share what you're feeling and what you're thinking about as you learn from this workshop. We do ask that you mute your audio so that we don't have any additional feedback or background noises. And just stay engaged, get ready to learn some new things, and welcome to our community.
All right, so let's get started. Today's topic is executive function action skills. Yay! We're going to get started right off the bat with an activity for you to just think about yourself for just a moment. The first thing I'd like you to do is I'm going to give you 5 seconds. Yep, only 5 seconds. And what I want you to do is in the 5 seconds you're given, identify 3 of your strengths. Are we ready? You don't have to write them down, but get them in your head. 3 strengths, 5 seconds, let's go. Time's up. How many of you were able to come up with 3 of your strengths? Thumbs up. Thumbs down. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to flip this a little bit. And this time I'm going to give you 5 seconds, but I want you to identify 3 of your weaknesses. Are we ready? 5 seconds, 3 weaknesses. Let's go. All right, pretty fast. How many of you were able to come up with 5 weaknesses? Thumbs up, thumbs down. All right, so let's talk about that for a minute. For some of you, it was harder to come up with your strengths than your weaknesses. So why is that? Well, what we know is that we tend to be very critical of our own selves. And so when we focus on our positives, it's a little bit more difficult for us. And so what we want you to think about is, if it was easier for you to identify your weakness, how come? Do you tend to focus on the negatives? So let's go to the next slide. And what research tells us is that it is much easier when we identify our weaknesses because our brain automatically tends to focus on the negative. Let's unpack that a little bit further. So what research says is that we are really not the best judges of our own actual behaviors. In fact, we're our own worst enemy sometimes. We are probably the least qualified person to provide this information about our own strengths. So what it means is most of us are inclined to think about our weaknesses and try to find ways to improve it. And not that that's wrong, because we always want to be the best us we can be. But when we focus on our strengths and we make that our priority, then we're using our brain's strength and resources to work through the weaknesses as we continue to build our strengths. So your strengths are the areas where you have your most potential. So when your efforts are going to produce the greatest outcome, then you need to make sure you're focusing on your strengths. And I know when we talk about executive functions, we always end up finding out, oh, that's not necessarily a strength. But within each of them, I'm sure we can find a little strength. So let's put our mind to it and see how we make out. So remember, each of us has strengths and weaknesses in each of the areas. So keep a lookout for the areas by which you have strength and how we can best use that to reach our goals and objectives. So let's unpack this idea of executive function. For those of you that are new with us, we look at executive function much like a traffic control center. So traffic control has to manage all of the arriving and departing flights all day long. And it's the same thing with our brains. When we're using our executive functions, which are located in the frontal lobe of our brain, it's helping us to plan, focus our attention, remember instructions, juggle multiple tasks all at the same time. But what it also helps us to do is it helps us to filter out some of those distractions, things that pull us off task. It helps us to prioritize tasks so that we're the most efficient and effective at getting the work done. And it helps us to set and achieve our goals while we control our impulses. And as you can see, we tend to use the definition from the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University when we talk about executive functions. So that's really where we're going to ground a lot of the work that we present to you tonight.
So for those of you who have been with us previously for this particular subject matter, we've been talking about the executive function skills. And so we know that there are 3 buckets of those skill sets that we've been addressing. Last time we were together, we talked about thoughts. And so tonight we're going to really dive into the bucket of, and then we talked about actions and emotions. So we're going to dive into those acts this evening. If you would like, we do have a placemat, a document that we've been using to help you see all of the executive functioning skills in one place, categorized by their different buckets. And you can download that for free on our website, which is showing on the screen. And that way you'll have it not only to work with us through these workshops, but also to use as a resource.
So let's take a look at our little friend here. So look familiar to you? Do you ever feel this way, that you have brain fog, that there's tremendous confusion, you're distracted by every little thing in the environment, you forget things, you have difficulty learning, you can't follow directions, you can't get the work done, and oh my gosh, when is it ever going to end? And sometimes when we have so many tasks going on, our brain has difficulty figuring out where to put our attention, how to prioritize the task, how to stay organized and get it done. And these are all part of our executive functions. So let's unpack this a little bit so our little friend here can de-stress and learn how to be more effective in getting the work done. So tonight we're in the action bucket, and these are the doing skills. Each of these actions requires us to perform a particular task. We're going to talk about 5 areas. We'll talk about organization, task initiation, goal-directed persistence, sustained attention, and response inhibition. All of those make up the action bucket that we call the doing skills. So, can you resist distractions when you're trying to focus? Can you inhibit your impulses? Can you bounce back from difficult emotions? And can you delay gratification and plan ahead? Well, if you have any difficulty with any of those skills, that's the response inhibition. It's the capacity to think before you act. This is sometimes where that hindsight comes into play. So when we're trying to inhibit or control our impulsive responses, we need to use both our attention and our reasoning before we come out with a response. Things like anticipation, planning, and goal setting all contribute to your ability to inhibit your response. If you're good at anticipating and waiting for that to happen, you'll be great at being able to hold back and not blurt out whatever it is you want to say or do. It also helps us to stop inappropriate automatic reactions. And we oftentimes see this in our children when they might say something they know they shouldn't say. And that's that inability to stop and think before it comes out. So that's response inhibition. So there are 3 different types of response inhibition that we can talk about. So the first one is called the motor level. And this is where that hyperactivity comes in. So children with ADD and ADHD are typically in this category, but you don't have to be ADD or ADHD. There are some people who are constantly on the move and they can't stop that. They always have to have something moving. Could be that their leg is twitching, could be that they're tapping on the desk. Those are the motor level inhibition, inhibitory control. Whew, that's a hard one sometimes. Let's look at level 2. So when we get to level 2, this is the attention level. This is that distractibility. So when you're having trouble paying attention, oftentimes in the classroom, if there's somebody talking next to a child, they have difficulty. If you're trying to get a task done and your child at home is saying, you know, Mom, can you give me? It's difficulty, you have difficulty paying attention. This is also difficult for some of our children with disabilities. So sometimes our children with autism have difficulty with extraneous noises. It could be noises from the light or the heater, or maybe something coming from outside. And so when children have difficulty controlling their attention level, it often results in having some difficulty with getting a task done. And of course, our third level is a behavioral level. And this is that impulsive behavior. And you probably know someone who interrupts when you're in the middle of speaking, who blurts out answers, or in a classroom of kids who yells out the answer before they even get their hand in the air. That's a behavioral impulsive response. And it's typically from children who have difficulty inhibiting their response. It's not because they don't know, it's that lack of control that's getting in the way. So let's think about, what do we do then? So a couple things that we can think about to help with teaching this area of control. One is out of sight, out of mind. If you know that you are distracted or your child is easily distracted, put those objects out of sight so they're not a constant reminder and a constant distraction to the child who's trying to get their work done. And I know for children that are working from home right now and still in this hybrid virtual world, sometimes we have to clear out the learning space so that they're not attracted to a toy that they may want to play with, or maybe click over and play a video game. So again, out of sight, out of mind. Sometimes this works pretty good for adults who have difficulty controlling their impulses around chocolate or sweets. Sometimes we hide those things in the pantry. You know who I'm talking about. Yep, out of sight, out of mind. So the other part is creating this environment where we reward ourselves for exercising control. So for instance, when children are able to raise their hand and wait to be acknowledged, we need to make sure that we acknowledge them for demonstrating that control. When we ask children to pay attention to something for any length of time, we have to acknowledge them of, hey, you did a great job staying on task. We can also play games that help with self-control, and we'll get to those in just a few minutes. But another thing to think about is giving kids a break. Oftentimes when children start to lose control, it's when they have exhausted their ability to remain compliant. And this is where a movement break, some kind of a distraction enables them to relax the brain so that you can get back into learning after the brain has had a moment to relax and get away from the stressful thinking that's been required of the student at that time. All right, so now let's take a look at some of those games. All right, so the next game is red light, green light. So in the red light, green light game, you know that as soon as you say green light, the children run, 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 and then they have to stop. And they're always anticipating when you're going to say that. Simon Says is the same thing, where you go, Simon says this, Simon says this, Simon says this, and do this. And kids are so quick with their movements that they oftentimes have to get out. So those are really great games to help them with inhibitory control. Now the feely bag's a little different. This is where you put things in a bag and the child has to reach their hand in and figure out what it is. So there's a lot of skill that goes into that because the child has to, one, use their tactile senses, maybe their sense of smell, depending on what's in the bag. And they also have to have a visual imagery of what that is. And if you only give them one opportunity to tell you what's in the bag, they have to inhibit that response until they're sure they figured it out. But most children, they reach in, they touch it, and they immediately shout out what they think it is without fully exploring what that object is. It's a great game to teach children the idea of practice and waiting till you explored all options before responding. Hide and seek is a great one. So we know that for the people hiding, it's one thing, but it's the seeker who has to have the ability to control the urge not to peek. And as kids, you always know that one friend who always peeked because they couldn't inhibit that. They had to peek and see where everybody was. And I remember when I was in school playing a game called 7-Up. Some of you probably have never heard of that in your life. Same idea where you'd put your head down and somebody would tap the back of your head. You had to figure out who it was. And a lot of times kids would cheat by looking at the shoes. We always knew who those kids were that had no idea that it was an executive function. And then the last one is cooking. So cooking is having to withhold the outcome until it's finished. So one example is making pudding. Pudding's pretty easy to make with children, but they have to wait till it cools before they can eat it. So as much as they want to dive in and eat that nice chocolate or vanilla pudding or banana pudding, whatever it is, they have to inhibit that until they can wait till it cools and then eat it. So these are great ways to work with children and have fun with children to develop this executive function. All right, now it's your turn to see how well you do with executive function. We're going to play a couple of rounds of the game blurt. So if you don't know how you play blurt, this is how it goes. And this is how we play it in the virtual world. I'm going to read you a definition of something. And if you know what it is, you're going to shout it out. If you don't want to shout it out, then you can put it in the chat. So the idea is to be the first person to blurt out the correct response. Are we ready to try? You can unmute yourself if you like, so you can shout it out, or you can put it in the chat. And Angelique, if you can help me figure out in the chat who gets it right, that would be great. All right, so here's your first clue. A flat, moving part that sticks out from the body of a fish.
Fin.
Fin is right. Good job. All right, here's your second one. This is a piece of iron shaped like a U and nailed to the
Horseshoe.
horseshoe is right. All right. Number 3. This is a strip of leather or other material worn around the waist of the clothes.
Belt.
Belt is right. All right, and this is our last one for tonight. Some of you blurters get there even before I finish asking. Good job. All right, so here's your last blurt. The sound made by falling drops.
Rain.
Rain.
Drip.
Rain.
Yep,
Drip.
I heard somebody. The answer is drip. All right, so this is a great game to help children twofold. One is to be able to exercise being able to call out the answer, but then telling them they have to wait 2 seconds before they can blurt the answer. And that 2 seconds is going to feel like a lifetime to them. But it's a great game, and it's a great way to have some fun with kids as they try to work on inhibitory control. All right.
That was pretty awesome, watching all the blurters go to work. Thanks for participating. That was great. So tell me, do you know anyone who needs reminders from adults to start a task? Is that you? Is that maybe your kiddo? What about those daily chores and homework, and you have to remind them until they need to rush to finish them on time because they've spent so much time doing other stuff? What about frequently asking for help, even if it's something really, really simple? And how about engaging in a problem behavior to avoid or even to escape doing a specific task? And then here's a big one. How many of us are procrastinators, or know procrastinators, or live with procrastinators, or teach procrastinators, or just have procrastinators in our lives? If any of these sound familiar, that individual is probably struggling with the executive function skill of task initiation. And that is basically the ability to begin those projects without undue procrastination, without someone tapping you on the shoulder or giving you that reminder, or coming in the room and tapping their watch and saying, get going with it. Task initiation is being able to start to do that thing. It's not even doing the thing or completing the thing, but it's actually getting up and starting the thing. And so it includes having to overcome that concept of procrastinating and getting started on tasks even when you don't want to do them. And I see that it's not only our kiddos, but for some of us, it's our 50-year-old man children, it's our daughters, it's our neighbors.
Some of us are 50-year-old man children. She said
there
it.
you go. There you go.
50-year-old man children.
This is the reality of struggling with task initiation.
Task initiation.
Next slide. Thanks. So I love this quote because basically it's helping us to understand that when learners struggle with task initiation, it almost seems like they're frequently getting in trouble for not doing their
Order
work.
in my car part.
While at
Taxes.
first glance, and we're going to ask that you remember to mute your phones and mute your computers. While at first glance, this can appear as attentional avoidance behavior. It can look like the child is not wanting to do the work. For kids and young adults who struggle with this task initiation, it's really simply that they lack that skill get themselves going. Next slide. So you have to ask yourself when it comes to thinking about your kiddos or even thinking about yourself, is it task initiation difficulty or is it really intentionally avoiding the task? They're very different. But what we want you to understand is that when it comes to having the challenge of being someone who cannot initiate the tasks, because it can be perceived as avoidance or non-compliance or even work refusal, it could really be something totally different. This could be a symptom related to anxiety, or not being able to start the task could simply be, I just don't know where to begin. It's overwhelming. It's so much for me to just figure out how to get started. It could be that you're someone who is so tunnel vision as it pertains to perfectionism that getting started scares you because of the fear of not being perfect, of being perceived imperfect, of being perceived as someone who can't get the job done. Or it could simply be that you're easily distracted, and so therefore you avoid the task. And another aspect is that there are prerequisites. So it's not just getting to task initiation and being able to move through the ideas and to problem solve and get going, but before you can even engage in task initiation, you have to be able to plan. And then taking it a step further, you have to be able to prioritize that plan. What step goes where? What do I do first? What do I do second? How do I wrap this up? Which is the most important aspect of this task? So there are definite prerequisites. And if you don't have those prerequisites, getting to task initiation is going to be a challenge. So here are some tips and just some ideas on how to jumpstart this particular executive function using timers. Of course, depending on the developmental capacity of the child or the adult, sometimes timers can be alarming because they literally shock you into doing the work, but there are very good cues, especially if you use the one similar that we've depicted here that shows you the amount of time that's left for that task. And then even being able to check for understanding. And I'll take just a step back because being able to check for understanding means that you have to feel like you're in a safe space, that you can ask questions, that you can feel that if I say I don't understand, that it will be received with acceptance, that it will be received with warmth and understanding. And then providing a visual model always helps. Breaking down the tasks. First, we do this. And that's why we automatically suggest a first, then board. First, we do this, then we do this. And even sometimes afterwards, we do this and rinse and repeat. Then we do this again. And the checklists are a really good way when you're learning how to initiate tasks to check those tasks off after you've completed them. And most of these tools work for children as well as for adults.
Right, so let's keep going with our executive functions and see how we do with this one. So do you have trouble sitting or working for long periods of time? Do you provide an automatic response before even thinking it through? Do you have difficulty getting through long commitments without complaining? Do you look out the window or scroll through your phone when someone's talking? And do you have difficulty shifting your focus if the first task is not finished? So you can't move on until it's done? If any of these sound familiar to you, well, you're not alone. Look at our little guy here. It says, look, it's almost 11 o'clock. Wow, the last 2 hours really flew by. I hope the teacher didn't say anything important. So obviously our friend here was having some difficulty paying attention to what the teacher was saying. Some of you might experience that at home with your own children or with a significant other. So if that is the case, what we're talking about here is sustained attention. And it's the ability to manage emotions, to achieve goals, to complete tasks, or control and direct your behavior. So the ability to pay attention to something for a long period of time. And so oftentimes when we think about a long period of time, what research says is that when we're talking about children, it's typically 3 to 6 minutes per year, not to exceed 15 to 20 minutes of a sustained attention task. So when we think about an average classroom and an average task, we need to make sure that we're narrowing down the focus so the child can complete it in a time that's developmentally appropriate for their age. So paying attention not only involves your self-awareness about that level of attention that you need to direct and redirect your focus as needed. It's also being able to ignore all those distractions. So we talked about that cell phone, or we talked about the child tapping on the desk. It's being able to switch your focus between what you're doing, a new task, more important information, and all the while being able to hear what the teacher is saying and giving directions while you're doing your work. So sustaining attention is a really challenging obstacle that many children struggle with, but there are ways we can help. So let's break down the types of attention. Sustained attention is having the ability to maintain attention for a long period of time. And when I say long period, I'm talking for children somewhere in that 15 to 20 minute time period, working directly and focusing directly on one task. When we break it down to selective attention, what we're working on here is kind of our conscious and unconscious attention. So sometimes we may be paying attention to something, but then all of a sudden our attention drifts to a thought we have. It's like, I wonder what's for dinner tonight. Or I wonder if it's going to rain and my practice will be canceled this afternoon. So we get into this selective attention. Is our mind wandering and we're drifting off to pay attention to that thought, or are we paying attention to the task at hand? Alternating your attention is being able to shift your attention from one thing to another. In order to do this, you have to be a pretty agile thinker and pretty flexible to be able to work on a task, look up, redirect your attention, and go back to your task. Now, if you're a parent, you do this all the time. You're constantly having to alternate your attention from what you're doing to what one of your children may need or ask of you all the time. And teachers do this throughout their entire day. They're constantly alternating their attention between the small group instruction that they're giving to the larger group, to an independent student that may need some help. This really takes talent and agile thinking to be able to do this alternating attention. And then the last is divided attention. And this is being able to do two things at the same time. Now, some people call it multitasking. So a good example of this is when you're driving and having a conversation with somebody in the car. You have divided attention. You're paying attention to the road and you're having a conversation. You're not texting on the phone. That's not the same thing. You're having a conversation or you're Bluetoothing it. But what happens when you're driving a new route and you don't know where you're going? You don't have an automatic memory of how to get there. All of a sudden, the conversation needs to stop because you need to pay attention to the roads, or you need to pay attention to your GPS. How about when you're driving alone and all of a sudden you're not sure where you are, and all of a sudden you turn the music way down? And it's because your brain is saying, I can't focus on the road and figuring out where we are when that music is distracting me. So sometimes the brain is our signal for when that divided attention isn't going to work anymore, and we really need to have focused, sustained attention on the task at hand. So When we're looking at the sustained attention, we need to make sure that, oops, we're going in the wrong direction, Diane, that we are working on safety first. And when the brain is responding to the stimuli in our environment, we need to see if in fact we feel threatened or unsafe because of something in the environment. And from the work we've done on understanding the brain, we know that when the amygdala feels fear or threat, it responds with this, uh-oh, uh-oh. And our immediate response of the brain is safety. So when our brain is working on self-regulating and using its resources to keep us safe, we don't have the cognitive resources to engage in active learning. So if we want our children to be able to engage in the learning process, we need to have them in a calm state. They need to feel safe, and they need to be able to focus. So activities such as deep breathing, movement breaks, visualization activities, thinking like, all right, think about the waves coming in and out. Think about the wind blowing softly. Those are things that help calm children down. And when we calm the brain, learning can happen. So let's take a look at a few more strategies. So we talked about the fact that children should not have sustained attention exceeding about 15 or 20 minutes. At that time, movement breaks are great. Even if we get them to get up and do a couple of exercises, you can do a walk and share where the students get up, they find a partner, and they walk around the room telling their partner what they just learned or what they were just working on. These are all great ways to keep our children's brains active when we need them to be focused. For teachers, varying that instructional practice really helps to keep kids engaged. So part of the lesson is whole group, when maybe you're introducing concepts as a whole to the class. Then using collaborative teams to work in small groups to unpack their learning and look at this new concept and figure out how they can use this knowledge in their previous and in their future learnings. And also centers where children go and work independently at a center. And varying these approaches allows children the opportunity to engage their brain in various modalities by walking around, moving, and having opportunities to work independently as well as in whole groups. One of my favorite strategies is preview and planning. And this is great, not only for the classroom, but also for families who are against it or something.
Okay, do you really like these?
Great. So
really
when you
like-
preview and plan, you really take time to look at the task before you try to do it. So if you're reading a new story, you look at the title and then you look at the pictures and you do a walkthrough of the story. And think about, I wonder what this is going to be about. What do you think? And then you start doing some planning around, let's see how many pages it is and how many should we read today? Same strategy can be used when you're going on a trip. You preview the trip by looking at this through pictures, through online videos of this is where we're going to be going. And let's look at a map at how far it is. Wow, how long do you think we're going to be in the car for this? And you begin to prepare children for the fact that this is going to take a while. And these are some things we can do to help with making the time go by faster. Discouraging frenetic work patterns is something that I oftentimes talk to teachers about. When children are engaged in a challenging task, frequently teachers will say, when you finish, you can go out to recess. Or when we're finished, we'll have free time. And what that relates to the child is, I'm going to rush through this work because I want to have free time or I want to go out to recess. And then what happens is the child isn't focused on the task, they're focused on getting out to recess and figuring out who's already finished and how much faster they need to work. We also do this at home sometimes. You know, when you finish cleaning your room, you can go outside and play with your friends. And then they throw everything in the closet or under the bed, and now they're ready to go out and play. So it's best not to tell them when they're finished, they can do something like go outside or play until you really have explained very explicitly what that means, finished. So getting organized is another great strategy to use, such as color coding, labeling. And so teachers do it all the time where they have folders that are certain colors for certain subjects. They have all the bins that are labeled, and that's where they store materials. So children can easily get the materials they need and be able to start the task as opposed to trying to figure out where things might be stored. And then the last strategy I wanted to share with you tonight is behavior modification and self-assessment in teaching children to monitor themselves. And in this approach, children are rating themselves, whether they were on task, whether they were off task, and how well they did. And I believe we have an example of what that looks like. So let's take a look at a couple of these strategies. So as you can see on the left, here's our colored bins. Everything is color coded. So you know that if it's the red, you're going to put all of your reading assignments in there. The orange is all your math, so on and so forth. So kids can organize their paper and their work in the corresponding colors and be able to quickly identify which folder they need and where to put their materials when they're done. Angelique shared with you earlier the clock. And the clock is a great way for children to understand how much time is left. So if we're trying to tell them that we're going to stay on this task for 5 minutes, and we set the red to 5, when the red gets to 0, it means we're done. And as children see the red disappearing, they begin to understand, wow, it's almost time for me to be able to have some fun. So the picture walk and preview is that preview and planning that I shared. And this is a great way to really help children get acclimated and oriented to the work that they're about to do. So they have a little bit of familiarity of what they're going to be reading. So it begins to set the context for the work that they're going to do. And so that allows children to kind of look through, get some ideas, and feel comfortable with the reading or the that they're about to do. Here's a copy of the self-assessment piece. And so here's a chart where the child has the opportunity to rate themselves. So did they follow directions? They did great, they did okay, or they need work. And this is just a great way for a child to kind of look at how they progress during the day. And it also gives the teacher or the parent opportunities to think about some strategies you may want to teach your child to be able to better self-regulate so they can stay focused and attend to the task at hand. All right, so now we're going to see how well your attention is. Are we ready? So we're going to play a little game, and there are 2 tasks. So let's get started, see how well you do.
How well can you stay focused on a simple counting task? Let's test our concentration by trying to count how many times these balls bounce. Each time a ball hits the ground counts as 1 bounce. Get ready, the balls will start bouncing in 3, 2, 1. So how many times did the balls touch the ground? What else did you see?
31.
Did you notice the balls change shape? Did you notice the background colour changed? If you notice these changes, were you still able to count the correct number of bounces? Our brains can only take in so much information. We can easily miss things that are clearly in front of us, simply because our brain is busy doing something else. For us to see a change, like the shape of the circles, it has to be important or different enough for us to notice. When we do, we'll most likely lose track of what we were doing to begin with. This simple activity shows there's a limit to what our brain can handle, and we need to think about what we focus on, especially at times of increased risk. Now that you've got the hang of it, let's have another turn at the counting activity. Test your concentration again by seeing if you can correctly count the number of times the balls bounce, but only those that land in the shaded area at the bottom of the screen. Ready and focused? Let's go. How did you go this time around? 10 was the correct number of bounces. What else did you see? Did you notice the shaded area change shape? What about the background colour? Did you see the ghost appear? How about the ball with the face on it? If you spotted any of these, how did you go with correctly counting the number of bounces? It can be easier to spot these elements when our brain is primed to be on the lookout for them. However, we can't process everything on the screen and count the bounces successfully. Our brain can only take in so much information. What blind spots do you need to be managing today? Thanks for participating. To see more brain-based animations, make sure to visit our YouTube channel. Just search Centres Digital.
So hopefully you all were able to see some of those things and be able to work on our concentration.
So here's another line of inquiry for you. How about have a hard time recognizing mistakes or challenges? Or do you know someone who resists taking responsibility? How about someone who finishes a first draft with little or no time spent reviewing? Can only imagine what that's like for the world of copywriting and editing, right? How about they don't adjust to the quality of work suggestions are made? Or maybe they have difficulty anticipating or preparing themselves for the outcomes of their work, or even just having difficulty setting and working towards goals. You know anyone who passes blame, gives up easily? If so, you might know someone who is struggling with goal-directed persistence. And that's basically having the capacity to formulate a goal and follow through with that goal to its completion and not be distracted along the way by things that are competing for your interests. When we think about goal-directed persistence, I love this term, stick-to-itness. Yes, it is really a word, stick-to-itness, and it really means to hunker down and to not give up and to complete it until it is done, not to be thrown, not to be put off by other demands or by those competing interests. Stick-to-itness, and this is really the crux of goal-directed persistence. So when we think about some of the obstacles that might be in your way, how about when you have to stop doing something because you want to take care of an unrelated task? I don't know how many times being a remote worker that I've put something on the stove. Perfect example, this morning I was getting my protein on and I boiled a hard-boiled egg, and by 10 o'clock I forgot the egg was on the stove because I was engaged in work and I had to jump up and take care of something else. And it, of course, threw me off track. But what about poor planning? That's also a problem. And then when you're not really anticipating how long a task is going to take, and it really takes longer than you've expected, What about those unforeseen obstacles that may have arisen in the midst of you trying to work towards this goal? And of course, my favorite is when we're unable to delay gratification. I have to have it right now. I can't finish this document until I have this cookie. I can't finish this work until I go, rearrange my closet. That's more important than anything in the world, but because I would feel better. So really being able to delay gratification so that you can work towards that. So here are some strategies. We love strategies. Monitor your progress. Progress monitoring really helps you to set reasonable benchmarks. Then you can set reminders for yourself. I'm very big on electronic reminders. They'll pop up on the computer, they'll pop up on my phone, sometimes to the point where I don't even know which device to look at because I set reminders everywhere. And then as you learn to really overcome this challenge, it will help you develop a growth mindset. And so that positive self-talk is a big aspect in doing that. You've got this. You can do this. You can finish this. It's not as big as you think. Get to the finish line. You've got this. And then, of course, and we've talked about this throughout the workshop for certain aspects, take those short breaks when they're needed. Often we're sitting for long hours at a time, and that sort of will become a competing interest because our legs get tired, our backsides get tired of sitting. So take those breaks, stand up, walk around for a second, and give your brain a shift so that it can come right back to that work. And importantly, reward yourself. When you reward yourself for that stick-to-itness, you're helping to build it. We know that good stuff breeds more good stuff. So if I reward myself and celebrate those small accomplishments, I'm going to want to come back and reward myself all over again. So of course, we like to share some worksheets, and I was actually watching the chat, and some individuals had asked about our worksheets, and many of them you can find public domain if you just Google the terms that we're talking about, so that you can PDF them and save them for your toolbox. And then here are a few more that we're suggesting: a tracking worksheet. And then of course, we live in the age of all things technical. So you grab your phone and you can find apps, and more apps on how to track. We're tracking our steps, we're tracking our heartbeat, we're tracking how many breaths we took in a moment. You can track, and also give you motivation to continue to set those goals for yourself, because it's a great thing to check off a goal.
All right, let's move on to our last one for this evening. So do you by any chance have a messy house, a room, a desk, anything like that? Do you have difficulty finding necessary items? Do you lose items or not finish tasks? And do you lack a system for managing your tasks? Well, if any of these at all sound familiar to you, we're talking about the executive function organization. And it's that ability to create and maintain systems to keep track of information and materials. And it's not only how we manage our things, so how we sort and store information, but it's also how we manage routines. Because it's one thing to set up a system and everything looks nice and organized, but if you don't have a routine for keeping the system in place, then it quickly becomes chaotic and unkempt again. So we need to manage not only your things and information, but also routines at the same time. So why is this so important? Well, we know that children and adults who have poor organizational skills take a lot longer to get ready because they're looking for things and there's no systematic way of doing it. So they're running around the house trying to find what they need, or they're rummaging through that backpack because they know they put that homework in there somewhere. They lose and misplace things all the time. And if you're the adult, maybe this is the keys where you can't find your keys, which is why you're late for work. And oftentimes they lose their train of thought. And so particularly for children who are trying to get out a thought with that expressive language, and they get stuck because they can't find the word they're looking for, or they have difficulty pronouncing it, oftentimes that will result in a behavior. So the reason it's important, because it does impact their behavior, and oftentimes will result in poor self-regulation. Children get frustrated when they can't find their things, and when things don't work the way they want them to work, or when they can't finish their thought because they can't think of that word. And oftentimes there are academic issues because their organization isn't there. They lost the paper. They didn't hand it in. They didn't bring their homework home. They didn't bring it back. They forgot the permission slip. And all of this eventually impacts the self-image of I'm no good, I'm stupid, I can't get this right, I can't find anything. And it leads to a very chaotic environment. And so organization is one of the executive functions that helps us to put things in place so our brain uses less cognitive resource to find the things we need. So children who have poor executive functioning are much more disorganized than other kids. So one of the resources that I love using is called Pathway to Success. And this is one of their Pinterest activities that they have. And it's talking about strategies that teachers can use, but I also think they work really well at home. One is a daily schedule, of posting that daily schedule so the child is organized and has what they need for the schedule. Sometimes it's good with our children that have disabilities. We actually Velcro the information and we pull it off once it's done. So the child can see how much of the day is gone and how many more tasks they have or subjects they have before the end of the day. And I saw somebody in the chats was talking about using sticky notes. That's also a way that we can help be organized and remove things when we finished them. Making sure that you put homework in the same spot. And this is both for teachers and for parents at home. So as a teacher, if you always write the homework in the same spot on the chalkboard or in your smart board, if you're using a smart board, children automatically get trained of where to look for the homework. They know it's always in the left corner on the up in the upper quadrant, and it's always in red. Kids begin to get trained to automatically look there for homework. They practice routines, practice the routines at home, practice the routine of getting up. What do we do? What's the order that we should do it? So kids don't have to think when they get up. They know they get up, they go in the bathroom, they get washed up, and they're automatically doing this and not having to think it through. Some of the other things that I like is having that office materials available. So children have all the supplies they need. And it could be in the labeled boxes, it could be in color coded, but it enables the children to be able to stay organized and to know where the materials get stored at the end of their work session. And then the last thing that I think is really important for us to remember is that we need to let our kids work through their challenges. And we've talked about this in other webinars where our children have to learn to work through the frustrations. And we're there as the emotional coach to encourage them. But if we always save them, they never learn how to work through a challenge on their own and become independent. So even with organization, if they lose their things, let them find it and let them struggle until they learn how to put things away where they belong so they don't have to run around the house looking for their items. Another way to help with this is being very explicit in what we mean. So remember, I talked earlier about putting kids in a frenzy to finish their work. Well, by using a visual display such as this, we allow the children to see exactly what we mean when we say clean up your room. Another great example that a colleague of mine shared is actually having a picture of your child's room clean so they can see, pick up your trash, put away your toys, and then at the bottom, we have a picture of what their room looks like. And it doesn't have everything shoved in the closet or under the bed, but it has things nice and orderly. But this is a great way to make sure that you're very explicit in how to keep organization in their bedrooms.
So this brings us to the close of our workshop this evening, but we always want to remind you the importance of giving yourself some grace, giving your kiddos some grace, and knowing that through everything, we always have opportunities to develop, to boost those executive functioning skills, and to improve in our functioning. When we started this workshop, we gave you 5 seconds to think of your 3 greatest strengths that you could think of. And we also gave you some time to pour through a few of those areas of improvement, because at the end of the day, we have them all, but we also have the great opportunity and resiliency to move forward and grow through the process. So remember, in that action bucket is organization, goal-directed persistence, response inhibition, task initiation, and sustained attention. Keep working at it, keep using those resources, and we promise you will definitely improve. To leverage those strengths, let's embrace each and every challenge. It's what makes us who we are, individually amazing.
All right, so we're going to encourage you to visit our website for the free resources. Today's PowerPoint and the recording will be there, as well as some of the worksheets, so you are able to find them. Our website is childrensguild.org/webinars/. And so the webinar and recordings will be available in about 7 to 10 days. I know many of you had asked, so you can certainly find it there. Our next session for May will be on the final bucket in our executive functions, which is emotions. And that will be held on May 19th from 7 to 8. So we hope you will come back for our final session on executive functions. And not only will we talk about emotions, but we'll also talk about how do we unpack some of these when we look at our day-to-day tasks. So if you have any questions or comments, you can reach us at info@transed.org. And last but not least, I'd like to invite each of you to participate in changing the future of our children by joining us for the Kids First initiative. We meet through virtual meetings every month. It's the 4th Wednesday of the month from 4 to 6. And we would love to have you come and join in and share resources and ideas of how we can change America so that our children get the services that they need and that they can flourish and be successful. So thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you for participating. We hope you picked up a few strategies and hope to see you next month. Good night now.